Shadows of Justice. In the vibrant yet shadowed heart of the coastal city, a colossal structure reached skyward, a monument to ambition and a beacon of urban progress. This towering building, still clad in its skeletal framework of steel and concrete, was set to redefine the city's skyline. Yet, as is often the case in places teeming with hustle and relentless drive, a darker narrative unfolded beneath the surface shimmer of potential and promise. On a cool, overcast morning, Detective Elizabeth Carter was summoned to this very site. Known for her sharp intuition and unwavering dedication, Elizabeth had made a name for herself within the police department as someone who could be relied upon to handle the most intricate cases. Today's mystery involved the unsettling disappearance of Mark Sullivan, a construction worker whose charm and easygoing nature made him a favorite among his colleagues. His sudden absence had not only cast a pall over the site but had also left an eerie silence in its wake, as if the very building mourned his loss. As she stepped onto the site, Elizabeth felt the chill of the unseasonably cool air and the tangible sense of unease that seemed to hang over the half-finished floors and exposed beams. She moved towards a large dumpster stationed at the edge of the construction zone, its contents a jumble of scrap materials and discarded plans. It was here that the first clue to Mark's disappearance would reveal itself: a crushed wristwatch, unmistakably belonging to Mark, found amidst the debris. Elizabeth picked up the damaged timepiece, turning it over in her hands. The glass was shattered, the hands frozen at the time that perhaps marked Mark's last known moments at the site. Why would a man leave behind a piece of his life? She mused aloud, her voice barely a whisper over the bustle of the city beyond the construction fencing. The question lingered in the chilly air, and as she gazed back at the incomplete edifice, a feeling of foreboding settled over her. Her presence and probing did not go unnoticed. Charles Warner, the site's construction manager, approached with a guarded demeanor. His eyes darted from the detective to the watch in her hands and back again, a clear sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the coolness of the day. Elizabeth noted his discomfort, which seemed disproportionate to the casual inquiry she had posed about Mark's last seen location. "Detective, this project is behind schedule, and now with Mark missing, I fear things will only get worse," Charles admitted, his voice strained. His attempt to divert attention from the watch to the logistics of construction did little to deter Elizabeth's growing suspicion. She knew from experience that fear often spoke in veiled phrases and half-truths. Determined to peel back the layers of this mystery, Elizabeth decided to press further. She requested access to the site's security tapes and personnel records, her mind piecing together the possible scenarios that could have led to such an incident. As she delved deeper into the investigation, every shadow whispered secrets, and every echo through the hollows of the building seemed to call out with hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. As the day progressed, the puzzle of Mark's disappearance grew more complex. Interviews with other workers painted a picture of a man well-liked and dependable, one whose disappearance felt as incongruous as a shadow in the noonday sun. Yet, amid these conversations, snippets of overheard dialogues hinted at undercurrents of discontent and unresolved tensions among the crew, suggesting that the site was not just a place of physical construction but also a battleground of clashing ambitions and hidden agendas. By the end of her first day on the case, Elizabeth had gathered enough fragmented pieces to sense the outline of something sinister lurking within the construction project. The crushed wristwatch was not merely a lost item. It was a silent testament to a darker story unfolding amid the steel bones of the towering structure. Determined to unearth the truth, Elizabeth prepared for the days ahead, knowing that each step brought her closer to understanding what had really happened to Mark, and possibly to discovering a threat that loomed much larger than anyone had imagined. Guided by an unyielding resolve, Detective Elizabeth Carter delved deeper into the shadows that the sunlight of progress could not illuminate. The trail of the crushed watch had led her to a sprawling landfill used for disposing of building debris, concrete fragments, twisted metal, and broken aspirations all piled into heaps that mirrored the layered complexities of the city itself. As Elizabeth maneuvered through the maze of discarded materials, the stark contrast between the landfill and the soaring construction site couldn't have been more pronounced. Here, amid the detritus of urban expansion, the past and present of the city intermingled in a dusty, chaotic mess. It was a place where secrets were dumped and forgotten, buried under layers of rubble and decay. But for Elizabeth, every discarded item whispered tales of neglect, ambition, and deception. She sifted through the debris methodically, her keen eyes catching a glimpse of paper fluttering in the breeze, a sudden anomaly in the otherwise stagnant air of the landfill. Approaching the spot, she unearthed a stack of partially shredded documents, each bearing the logo of the construction company managed by Charles. The documents were sodden and muddy, but still legible enough to reveal their sinister implications. They contained detailed plans and unauthorized transactions that pointed to a network of corruption entangling the construction project in a web of illicit activities. The more Elizabeth read, the more the pieces began to fit together, a mosaic of graft and exploitation hiding beneath the surface of the city's latest architectural endeavor. Her suspicion that Charles was involved in more than just standard construction malpractices grew stronger with each recovered document. It appeared that the construction site was not just building a new skyline but was also a front for laundering money, with implications that stretched dark tendrils into the city's underbelly. Reluctant to leave any stone unturned, Elizabeth collected the documents, carefully preserving them as evidence. Her next step was clear. She needed to follow the trail from the landfill to its next logical destination. She remembered the delivery schedules mentioned in the papers and decided to stake out the route most frequently used by trucks leaving the site. Her vigilance paid off later that evening when she spotted a truck, heavily laden and moving with a haste that suggested urgency beyond the ordinary. She tailed the vehicle at a discreet distance as it wound its way through the city's throbbing heart and out toward the industrial district where the port sprawled like a giant, breathing entity, alive with the sounds and smells of commerce and illicit dealings. The port was a different beast entirely. A sprawling complex of warehouses, cranes, and shipping containers, it represented the city's gateway to the wider world, but also a vulnerable point where illegal activities could slip through amidst the legitimate. The truck pulled up beside a freighter, its sides scuffed and worn as if it had seen decades of service across the world's oceans. The name on the hull was barely visible under layers of rust and grime, but Elizabeth could just make out the faded letters spelling out a name that matched one of the vessels listed in the documents she had found. The air was thick with brine and the acrid tang of diesel. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a discordant soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Elizabeth approached cautiously, using stacks of containers as cover. She observed as men unloaded the truck, not with the usual debris, but with boxes that seemed incongruous with the supposed contents of a construction site's waste. Her heart pounded as she realized the scope of what she was witnessing. It wasn't just a case of construction fraud or simple bribery. What unfolded before her eyes hinted at international smuggling, possibly even human trafficking, given the desperate circumstances outlined in some of the documents related to labor sourcing. Determined to gather undeniable proof, Elizabeth edged closer, her camera at the ready to document this crucial evidence. Every click of the shutter felt like a step closer to unraveling the network that Charles, and perhaps others far more dangerous, had woven into the fabric of the city. As the sun set over the port, casting long shadows and painting the scene in hues of orange and red, Elizabeth felt the weight of the night ahead. She knew this investigation could change the course of many lives, including her own, as she delved deeper into the labyrinth of containers and broken promises. Aboard the aging freighter, a palpable sense of danger permeated the air, thick with the stench of brine and sweat. Detective Elizabeth Carter, with the stealth and preparedness of a seasoned officer, treads softly across the creaking deck, her senses heightened to every sound. The ship, a hulking mass of rusted metal and secrets, seemed to groan under the weight of its sinister cargo. As she moved deeper into the belly of the ship, Elizabeth located a concealed hatch leading below deck. The air grew cooler and damper as she descended, the only sounds her own measured breathing and the distant crash of waves against the hull. She came upon a hidden compartment, cleverly disguised behind what appeared to be a bulkhead. Pushing it open revealed a dimly lit hold, where the real horror lay. The scene that unfolded before Elizabeth was one that would haunt her for years to come. Men and women, their eyes hollow with despair, were huddled together, their bodies marked by the harsh reality of forced labor. The sight of their weary, resigned faces struck a chord deep within her, fueling a fierce resolve to bring their tormentors to justice. It was a grim tableau of human misery, hidden away on the high seas. But before she could process the full extent of this atrocity or call for backup, Elizabeth was suddenly ambushed. Rough hands grabbed her, and she found herself facing the very architects of this nightmare. Her captors, a mix of hardened criminals who wore their malevolence like a second skin, underestimated her resolve. Their leader, a man with cold, calculating eyes, sneered, believing he had the upper hand. "Detective Carter, you should have stayed on land where it's safe," he taunted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. Elizabeth, her mind racing, knew she needed to think fast. She engaged them in conversation, probing for information while subtly assessing her surroundings for an escape route. Each moment she could delay her fate gave her a better chance to turn the situation to her advantage. Her training as a detective had prepared her for moments like this, negotiating with criminals, finding the psychological cracks in their armor. As the tense dialogue continued, Elizabeth spotted an opportunity, a loosely secured metal bar on one of the doors. With a sudden burst of energy, she pushed against her captor, grabbed the bar, and swung it with all her might. The confusion allowed her a few precious seconds to dash through the narrow corridors of the ship, her heart pounding as she navigated the labyrinthine passageways. The chase was frenetic, with shouts and the clatter of footsteps echoing behind her. Reaching the upper deck, Elizabeth used her radio to send out an urgent distress signal to the coastal police. Her voice was steady but carried the urgency of the situation. "This is Detective Carter. I need immediate assistance on the freighter. We have multiple hostages and armed suspects. Send backup now." Within minutes, the sound of sirens and helicopter blades filled the air. The police, like a force of nature, converged on the ship with precision and authority. High-speed police boats encircled the vessel, and sharpshooters positioned themselves, ready to act at a moment's notice. The criminals, realizing their situation was untenable, began to panic. Elizabeth used the chaos to her advantage, finding her way back to the hostages and reassuring them help was on the way. Her presence gave them a glimmer of hope, a promise that their ordeal was nearing its end. As the police stormed the ship, a fierce confrontation ensued. Elizabeth, despite the danger, stood her ground, coordinating the rescue efforts. One by one, the hostages were secured and led away from their prison, their expressions one of disbelief and relief as they were guided to safety. The leader of the smuggling ring was apprehended in a dramatic standoff, with Elizabeth herself placing the handcuffs around his wrists. His capture marked the end of a significant chapter in the city's battle against human trafficking and illegal labor exploitation. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the now tranquil waters, Elizabeth stood on the deck of the freed vessel, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the night's events. She had saved lives and restored justice, but the shadow of what she had witnessed below deck lingered in her mind. The fight was over, but the journey to heal those scars was just beginning. As the dust settled on the chaotic scene at the port, the reality of the harrowing rescue began to sink in for Detective Elizabeth Carter. The tumult of the operation, punctuated by urgent shouts and the rapid deployment of police forces, had been a desperate race against time. Lives hung in the balance, each second stretching into an agonizing eternity, as the law enforcement teams worked tirelessly to secure the area and ensure the safety of the hostages. In the midst of the frenzied activity, Charles was discovered cowering in a cramped, shadowed corner of the ship, his figure shrunken in defeat. The once confident and elusive figure, the mastermind behind the illegal operations, was now reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, his eyes darting around in panic. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, it signified more than just the end of a chase. It was a profound moment of justice, not only for the law but for all the souls he had callously exploited. Elizabeth watched intently as the survivors were escorted off the ship. Their faces, etched with the scars of their ordeal, were turned towards the light of day, tentative yet hopeful. The sight of their slow, uncertain steps towards freedom was a poignant reminder of the ordeal they had endured. The mix of relief and melancholy that swept over Elizabeth was overwhelming. Each survivor's face told a story of pain but also of resilience. The completion of the building project, which had initially led her to the heart of this darkness, now stood tall against the city skyline, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. As Elizabeth walked through its halls, now bustling with life instead of lurking shadows, she felt a profound connection to the edifice. It was as if the building itself was a participant in the narrative of redemption and renewal that had unfolded. Her journey back through the city streets was contemplative. Elizabeth's role as a protector of the city had never felt more vital. She realized that the battle against the darkness was ongoing, a perpetual challenge that required vigilance and bravery. The city, with its vibrant life and hidden shadows, was a reflection of humanity itself, capable of great beauty and significant darkness. With each step, Elizabeth felt the weight of her duty and the strength of her commitment to fight against the forces that sought to undermine the safety and dignity of its inhabitants. She knew that her actions had restored a measure of peace and order, but the deeper undercurrents of crime and exploitation still flowed through the city's veins. The experience had changed her, not just as a detective but as a person. She was more determined than ever to stand as a beacon of justice, to ensure that no other shadows would claim the lives or freedoms of innocent people. She was aware that the fight might be endless, that the balance between light and shadow was always in flux, but she was prepared. In the quiet moments of solitude, Elizabeth often reflected on the resilience of the human spirit she had witnessed. The survivors, with their capacity to endure and hope beyond their pain, inspired her. They were reminders of why her fight was essential, why the darkness could not be allowed to prevail. As the city moved around her, bustling and alive, Elizabeth's resolve hardened. She would be there, a steadfast guardian watching over it, her senses ever alert to the murmurs of trouble. In every corner of the city, in every whisper carried by the wind, Elizabeth Carter remained a vigilant sentinel, her life dedicated to protecting those who could not protect themselves. Her story, interwoven with those she had saved, was far from over. It was a continuous narrative of confronting evil and nurturing the light that emerged from the shadows. Elizabeth knew that each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to reinforce the light she had fought so hard to uphold. She was ready for whatever lay ahead, with her spirit unbroken and her commitment unwavering. At the end of this intense and revealing experience, where the veils of mystery have been lifted one by our determined detective Elizabeth Carter, we hope you have been captivated not only by the plot of suspense and danger but also by the profound look at issues of justice and redemption. This story, although an engaging thriller, reflects real struggles against injustices that permeate our days, reminding us of the importance of vigilance and courage in the face of evil. We invite you to delve even deeper into these themes, reflect on them, and, of course, express your own perceptions. Comment below what impacted you the most in this story and how such plots resonate in our society. Your feedback is vital to us and enriches the discussion these themes deserve. Do not forget to like the video if you appreciated this experience with us and share it with friends and family who are also interested in thrillers full of suspense and meaning. Your support, through likes, comments, and shares, helps our channel grow and bring even more relevant and engaging content. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing to follow more stories like this and stay updated with our latest releases. Each subscription helps us continue producing and improving the content we bring to you. Finally, we want to express our sincere thanks for your ongoing support. Your interaction and interest motivate us to always seek the best in impactful narratives and high-quality productions. Thank you for being with us on this exciting experience, and until the next story,